Good morning everybody. I am currently sat in my hotel room in Italy. I got here yesterday and we've spent the afternoon shooting with the new Sony 16-35mm f2.8 lens and the 12-24mm f4 lens. Not had a huge amount of time with the camera. We had an afternoon shooting yesterday. It was very sunny, bright sunlight conditions, photographed sunset by a lake, absolutely beautiful. And I've just been looking through some of my images and I'm going to show them to you now and hopefully give you a little bit of feedback on what the lenses were like to use and what the image quality is like, most importantly. Now this isn't a full review of the lenses, but I have been using them for long enough to give you some good overall impressions of what they're like to use and my initial thoughts about them both. So this here is the 16-35mm lens and I've got it here on an A7R2 which I was using yesterday. The lens itself is quite simple and straightforward. It's what you'd expect from a Sony FE lens, very simple layout. There's an AF/MF switch, there's a focus hold button there, and then obviously zoom ring and manual focus ring. It's worth noting that the manual focus ring, they really seem to have got this right. When you pull from one point to another, it really does feel like you're using a mechanical manual focus. It didn't seem to matter whether I was pulling slowly or quickly. It did seem to be stopping at pretty much the same point. Autofocus with both of these lenses, it's very quiet, it's fast. With the A7R2, it just did the job. It wasn't a concern. I pressed the button to focus, it focused, end of story. Just to add though, I didn't do a lot of autofocusing for video. So if you're going to be looking at these lenses for video, I suggest you check out some of the other guys on YouTube who are going to be concentrating more on the video features of these lenses. Personally, it seemed okay, but again, I'm not a videographer, I'm a photographer, so check out some of the other guys. It uses this petal-shaped lens hood, which is obviously quite key when you're using a wide-angle lens. There was just one scene yesterday where I was tilting ever so slightly up and was shooting in really hard, middle-of-the-day sunlight, and I did get a reflection from the lens hood and a bit of lens flare coming down. Again, you'd expect that. It's not the fault of the lens or the lens hood, but it was something to always look out for when you're using a wide-angle lens. Really worth noting is the fluorine lens coating here as well. You can really get rid of any fingerprints or any marks on it very quickly, very easily, and the lens just comes up as new. And that fluorine coating is also used on the 12-24mm lens. Image quality wise, obviously this is a G Master lens. There's loads of aspherical elements, extra aspherical elements in this which help to control curvilinear distortion, remove chromatic aberrations and all of the stuff you'd expect, especially for a lens costing £2,300. Now there is very little curvilinear distortion from what I could see on the JPEG and RAW images, but it's worth remembering that obviously the JPEGs are going to have distortion correction applied, as are the RAW images. I was looking at them in Lightroom and Bridge. I'll have to use another third-party bit of software to see what the images look like without these automatic corrections applied. But the truth is, I don't really care. I want my images to be distortion free, and if Sony are offering that in the JPEGs obviously and in the RAW files, then by all means go ahead and correct those. As long as I'm still getting 16mm shots, which I am, then I welcome the fact that the RAW files are corrected in that way. I've searched through the images, I've taken a few hundred and I can't see any chromatic aberrations. On very close inspection of one of the images that I shot at f2.8, I did notice very slight chromatic aberration in one of the RAW files. Now I actually measured the amount of pixels and the chromatic aberration was 6 pixels wide. Given that the image is actually almost 8,000 pixels wide, it's virtually unnoticeable. You're certainly not going to see it on a A4 or even an A3 print. And again, it was easily corrected in Camera Raw and Lightroom. In terms of sharpness, it's really sharp. 16mm the center, right across until you get to the very corners. In these very corners, there is a drop off in quality. Obviously, the image is being stretched and distorted. Then there's obviously a bit of in-camera correction going on as well, but it is only those very edges. The rest of the frame is really pin sharp, especially in the center. When you go to 35mm, you're using more of the center of the lens to create the image. So there's less drop off between the sharpness in the center and the corners. It's less noticeable. And again, it's sharp throughout the frame. I'm very happy with it. The other thing is you can use this at f2.8 at 16 or at 35 and it's sharp. At f4 to f16, it's very indistinguishable between the different aperture settings. You do notice the fraction at f22, that's to be expected. But I'd use f22 on this lens if I needed just a slightly longer exposure or for some reason I'm desperate to have an extremely large depth of field. But wide open, 2.8, perfectly usable. I'd be happy to use any aperture between 2.8 and f16. The sweet spot obviously seems to be around f8, f11, and it just snaps in with a tiny bit of crispness that you notice in the fine details, particularly when you're shooting with 42mm pixels with the A7R2. There are going to be loads of people saying, oh, but it's a fairly big lens and it's a small camera body, so there goes your advantage of having a compact system camera, a mirrorless camera. Forget all of that. Stop thinking about compact system cameras and DSLR cameras. What you've got here is some fantastic Sony camera bodies and some great bits of glass that are around the same size, sometimes a little bit bigger, sometimes a little bit smaller than your DSLR lens. Just get out there and take some pictures and kind of stop arguing about, oh, my camera's bigger or my camera's smaller. It's what the camera and the lens do. Find the right one for you. Anyway, I'm waffling. So onto the 12 to 24mm lens. Now this is a G series, not a G Master. So it sits slightly below the G Master range, but kind of on the side or in the middle of the Zeiss lenses. It's all a little bit confusing if you ask me. What you really need to know is it's again very similar in build quality. It's quite a small lens for a 12 to 24 f4. It's not big, it's not too heavy, and it feels nice. It's well constructed, it's well made. Again, the manual focusing seems to be very good. They've got it right with these two lenses. The zoom ring, you'll notice that the front element moves back and forward slightly, but it's all contained within this. It's got its own petal shaped lens hood obviously built in. Now there's no filter thread here, there's nothing around the inside of this lens here, and obviously you're going to need an extremely huge wide kind of filters to use with this, so I'm not sure you're going to be able to. Some genius may come up with a system that will fit the end of this, and then because of that it has its own cap there, as you'd expect, but it is a locking one. It does lock into place. It's a very similar story to the 16 to 35 in terms of the image quality of the 12 to 24. Very sharp in the middle, worthy of Sony's G Master designation. There is some stretching in the corners, as you'd expect. It is very wide. Curvilinear distortions, again, everything seems very sharp. Things are obviously being corrected in camera, in RAW and JPEG files. The 16 to 35mm f2.8, in summary, it's a really sharp lens. It's nice and crisp. However, it's £1,000 more than the f4 version. Now, images, I think, anecdotally, are a little bit snappier, crisper than the f4 lens. However, £1,000 is a big premium to pay for the difference in image quality and also the 2.8 to f4 aperture. I'm sure it's going to be a really popular lens amongst landscape photographers. However, for most of us, it's going to be a considered purchase when the f4 is £1,000 cheaper. Now, the 12 to 24mm lens. This is really, really wide. Actually shooting at 12mm in some of the places we were at yesterday was really tricky. It's difficult to frame shots without getting people walking into the scene, without getting tourists around. And with some of the landscapes, it's just too wide. You can't see the nice sun coming up in the distance because it's just like a pinpoint. What you need is some nice foreground rocks and something to focus on in the foreground if you're going to be using the lenses this wide. However, for interiors, 12mm was spot on. 24mm is nice, it's perfectly usable. However, with the 24 to 70 Zeiss lens being cheaper than this 12 to 24mm lens, most photographers are probably going to be better obviously buying the Zeiss 24-70, which is a far more usable range. So the 12 to 24, great lens, but again, another considered purchase. when using the 12mm, you have to have some specific shots that you're going to be taking in mind with it, or you might find you're not using it too much. So we've got two lenses here that really helps fill some gaps in Sony's lens lineup. The wide angle side of things is really covered. We've got the 12-24 super wide, which many photographers have been after for a while. And then finally, we can go from 16mm all the way to 200mm at f2.8 with the addition of this new 16-35mm lens. The lens lineup is looking a lot more complete now from Sony. So that wraps up this video on these two new Sony lenses. Now, you've probably got questions on these lenses that I've not been able to answer in this video. However, we hope to get them back in the next few weeks to do a bit more of a thorough test and review back in the UK. So if there is anything else you want to know, please leave a comment and a question in the section below, and we'll try and answer them the next time we get the chance to use these lenses. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming videos, and thank you for watching.